Our first speaker of the day is Ms. Elena Cohen. She flew in yesterday from Washington, D.C. She is with the Safe Start Center, and their sole focus is on working with children or trying to prevent the effects or alleviate the effects of children exposed to violence. She's going to give us a great overview of the entire issue. We've got some wonderful speakers lined up for you today, and I'm going to let her introduce how her segment is going to go this morning.
Good morning. As Jacqueline said, I'm Elena Cohen, and I am very happy to be here with you today. I come from Washington, D.C., although you may find that my accent is not quite Washington, D.C. I'm originally from Guatemala, so I'm going to ask you if there is anything that I say that you don't understand. I am not at all offended. Just raise your hand, and I may do the same thing with you if I don't understand you when you speak. So I am here today. I am usually not on this kind of local trainings. I usually do more national types of things, but this one was particularly interesting because of the Louisiana CASA and the Court Improvement Project, and that's how when Jacqueline was trying to find speakers, she wrote to actually my boss, which is at the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, and she suggested that I come. And so I'm very, very happy to be working with you because you really are the folks that are right there doing the work, so it makes a whole big difference. I work now with the Safe Start Center, which is in Washington, D.C., and it's actually in Bethesda, Maryland, very close to Washington, and I'm going to be I'm going to be mentioning throughout my talk today some of the resources that you can obtain by going there. But what we are is a resource center to provide support to the national audience on children's exposure to violence, but we also work very, very closely to do this. We work very closely with Safe Start grantees, and Safe Start grantees have been 11 grantees were funded from 1999 to 2005, and then there's 15 now, which are 2005 to 2010. And what they are is they go through a process of application that I'm sure you all are very familiar with, and obtain funds to do specific projects related to children exposure to violence. Some of you may be familiar with the Miami-Dade project that includes Cindy Lederman and Joy Osofsky, very well-known person from New Orleans, and Lynn Katz. And that's a Safe Start project where they got the funding to do specific services to kids exposed to violence and their families. And so we get our information. These are projects that have been evaluated. You have on your handouts the results of the first tier evaluation, which ended in 1999. And now we're on the second tier. We're trying to test evidence-based practices for children exposed to violence. So you have that in your handout. During the long day that you're going to be here today, Jacqueline has gathered a continuum of speakers, and I'm going to start by giving you an overview of the issue of exposure to violence. What does that mean? How do we see it? It's not directly targeting one professional audience or another. It's not targeting attorneys or child welfare professionals or mental health professionals or whatever. It's really for the information that all of us working with vulnerable children and families need to know, because the issue with children exposed to violence, as you're going to hear it today throughout the day, is what we call a problem without a home. Kids exposed to violence are in all of our systems. They're in our schools, they're in our churches, they are in our libraries, they're in any one of the systems that we are. But if you look at it, there is not one single system that is in charge of them. There is not one, if you talk about education, you know that the schools are in charge of that. There's support from other systems, but the schools are doing that. If you look at law enforcement, then you look at the systems that are dealing with that. The most important issue with exposure to violence in children, and when I say children, guys, I'm saying children and adolescents, so it's the continuum from birth to 18. I say children for time purposes. There is not one system that really is in charge. So when you have, in whatever capacity you work, or as a parent, and you have a kid that has been exposed to violence, there's not one place that you could refer this child, okay? There is not one system that is in charge. We all are in charge, and the only way that we could really work with this is if we all are together, figuring out a way to collaborate with each other and to know what is our role as attorneys, as families, as educators, as whatever capacity we have. So we are going to be talking today first about the issue of exposure to violence. My focus of the talking points of talking to you today, after I work a little bit about understanding what this means, is really as attorneys and as CASA volunteers and as folks that work with children in the child welfare system, what are some of the roles and what are some of the main key points that you need to have in place to really be able to work with other systems to do this. All of you here, all of you, because of the fields that you represent, deal with children exposure to violence. There's not one of you that does not. Okay? We're going to see it as part of our definition. So what is your role? And you can't solve the problem by yourself, but what are the issues that you need to be aware of that will help you figure out how to proceed? And my piece, as I said, would be that our role as attorneys and as folks working in the child welfare system will be to understand the child's behavior, but really to work with the family, with the parents, to be able to motivate them to help us. None of what we do in terms of interventions, mental health interventions, and we're going to talk about that, or foster care placements, or any of the interventions that we do will be successful if we don't get the parents, foster, biological, adoptive parents, to work with us to do it. So that's going to be my part of the presentation. After that, we're going to have a mental health person, Pam Albers, to talk about specifically the mental health part of it, which is, what are the programs, what are the skills, what are the things that we need to do for kids to get the evidence-based treatments that they need. And lastly, but obviously not least, is the legal implications and the legal part of this. I'm going to ask you to raise your hand anytime that you have a question or you don't understand. And we'll have a break sometime when you start feeling that you need to do that, because we had to cut short the day, somewhat short the day, because of the limitations with starting at 9:15. We have not put the breaks on the agenda, but you will have breaks, I promise. You won't explode here. Okay, so I'm going to start by showing you a video which was produced by, are you all familiar with Mr. Rogers, Family Communications? I think our age, or our children, or grandchildren, I don't know if they're showing it too much right now anymore, but for those of us that had children during that time, Mr. Rogers and the Family Communications Group has a full curriculum on exposure to violence. And this is one of the first video that they do to just introduce the topic to the audience. And my electronically savvy friend Jacqueline is going to do that for us.
When we had a lot of gang violence in our area, It affected a lot of kids. It affected my kids. And my son, for instance, was scared for me to go out and take the trash. He would say, "No, Mama, wait till daylight come. Don't go out now. Please just wait till in the morning."
They've seen police come in and tussle the whole apartment looking for drugs, and they've been locked in the bathroom. And when the door was open, their father was taken out in handcuffs. I mean, right at my center, I had two parents who fought in the parking lot, and the police came and arrested both parents and took them off to jail.
When grown-ups are out of control with their comments or actions, it's very uncomfortable for children, for young children. I think that we as adults don't realize, even I will hear parents say, "Oh, well, he's only 2 years old. He can't even talk," as if because a young child cannot talk, can't see.
To young children, the world is a big place, full of sights and sounds, people and things which they try to make sense of. Sometimes that can be a difficult job. As they explore and learn, children depend on adults for guidance, safety, and security in the world. Children need to believe that adults are strong enough to protect them. They need to know that their parents and relatives, teachers and neighbors, are committed to keeping them safe. Hello, I'm Maggie Stewart, and like many of you, I'm concerned about the violence that children can see. In my work with children and television, I have learned that young children too often look at and hear about real violence in their neighborhoods and communities. Some people might think that children don't notice the violence around them, or that they quickly forget about it, but young children can be seriously affected by witnessing violence. They can even have a hard time learning and making friends if they are afraid for themselves and their families. What might help children feel safe again if they have been affected by the violence in their surroundings? Every child is different, and each one has different needs, but all children need to have safe havens where they can feel secure with a trusted adult who knows them well and respects their feelings. Children can find safe havens with their families and their extended families, and most communities have a variety of safe places where parents and children can find supportive people if violence is disrupting their neighborhood. This clinic, for example, is a secure place for families who are looking for help for their children. Here, pediatricians like Norma Rosales and the clinic staff know how to help children who are affected by violence that they see.
When a parent goes into the clinic, we're a safe haven, and the community really views us as that very neutral zone, so that they feel fairly comfortable being able to talk to us about almost anything.
Sometimes what needs to be talked about is violence in the neighborhood and its effects on children and parents.
We often see children, unfortunately, who come into the clinic who have witnessed violence. They come in with very vague complaints, nightmares, having difficulty sleeping, school phobia, difficulty eating. So it has a real impact on their whole kind of well-being and development in life.
Right from the beginning, babies need to feel that their parents are protecting them. And a pediatrician who takes the time to listen and understand can offer many different kinds of support when violence is a problem. Community child care centers and schools are also places where parents and children can find support and understanding when they are troubled by violence in their neighborhoods. Teachers like Jackie Williams can work together with parents to help children feel safe so that they can learn and play.
I think it's important that children know that adults are just there for them, that they're open, and whatever they have to say about violence, about what they ate at school today, who their friends are, it's just important that adults are willing to listen to them.
What happened? You tired? Maria! You want to lie down over there? Maria. In my classroom, I'll allow the kids to talk about whatever they want to talk about. Because I feel if it's important enough for them to tell me, then it's important enough for me to listen to them. But when a child doesn't tell me what's going on, and I see a changed behavior in their behavior, then I'm concerned about what's going on with the child.
Children that have witnessed violence are usually a little withdrawn or very different than they were before. If it's a child that was very outgoing and spunky and had a lot to say, sometimes they come to school and you find that they're, instead of socializing with that group that they used to always be with and on the jungle gym or whatever, you find them in a quiet area, kind of off to themselves.
Teachers remember one child who had a sudden change in behavior, but was too young to tell them what was bothering him. With this child, it's like he was usually well-adjusted and coming to school with no problems. And all of a sudden, it's like he was having problems with separating from mom when she left in the morning and doing a lot of crying and kicking. And it was, not his behavior, his normal behavior. When she found time to talk with the parent, the child care provider learned what had disturbed the child. He had seen a shooting right outside the house where he lived.
And they killed two guys just right on the corner of my house. So that my kids was so scared. And I keep working with them, because they don't want to tell me anything. And they keep crying, give me some, a lot of troubles at the school. We tried working on some plans on how we can help the little boy here because he was having problems here and at home. She told me that he was having problems there too. And then when we tried working out all these different plans and nothing seemed to work, then I asked her if it was okay if I called our mental health consultant who's for the schools here. And she said, that would be very helpful. She just was at her ends of what to do with this child. I'm trying to do the best for my kids, And I feel in my heart it's terrible every morning to leave my kid without, do something for him. And I'm going to keep trying until something works. Okay, you're not going to be cold without this?
Talking about violence between the parent and the child is very important because it builds a relationship from early on with that parent and that child. And that child will feel like they can talk with their parent about anything and everything, and that their parent will stop what they're doing and take the time and listen to just them. And it values what they're saying.
It's really important for children to see that adults are there to help them and to protect them. for children to see their parents going to meetings, to parent meetings at the Children's Center, neighborhood watch meetings, to see that their parents are trying to do something about the violence in the community.
Children get reassured that their community is safe is when they see parents with community leaders. And I'm not talking about politicians necessarily, but people that they see in their neighborhood, with the police officers, with the principal, with a couple of the teachers, with the custodian, when they see them all talking with each other, communicating, or doing a community presentation in a positive, constructive way.
Children often reflect the outlooks of the people who are around them. Hopeful, helpful adults can make a big difference in their lives. Such adults can be found inside many neighborhood centers, which serve as anchors in the community and counteract the threat of violence. They can be found at places of worship, too, which offer families many different kinds of support in times of trouble.
I think churches have a particular role to play. I mean, they are viewed as safe space, as a place of welcome, as being places of strength, being places of healing, being places of safety, and also places that create programs in many instances. And I think as I look in our community here that is very much the case. Something we ought to be able to commit ourselves to as small communities and neighborhoods is creating spaces that value children and tell them really how wonderful they are and give them a space to grow in. I don't think that's an impossible thing to do. I think it can be done if people work together to do it.
When people work together, they can make their neighborhoods safer and feel that they belong. Otherwise, children and parents can share a painful sense of isolation.
When parents feel isolated and when they feel that they have no one to go to, no one to call, it's an unsettling feeling, and those unsettling feelings, those feelings of being alone and isolated, carry over to their children.
Parenting in itself can be stressful, and if you add anything else into it, violence, the neighborhood you live, your socioeconomic level, it adds to the stress.
The thing to remember about violence is that it's a cyclic process. There's a cycle there, and whether it be one parent or whether it be both parents, they can help break that cycle.
Breaking the cycle of violence is a major goal at this Parent Support Center. Here, with teacher Ruth Beaglehole, mothers help their children to feel safe. They remember how it felt to be frightened when they were little.
My mom used to drink a lot, and I didn't like, what she would do to me, the way she was treating me, the things that she used to do. So that's why I went to live with Shirley's dad, my daughter's dad, and to get out from my house because I didn't want to see that no more.
I would always hate for my dad to hit my mom. I would try to jump in, protect her, but my mom would throw things at my dad. So there's nothing I would do for him, but I was scared and hurt to see that my mom got hit and mistreated.
Growing up, I always remember that I never had anybody to talk to. So, like everything that happened in my life, I just thought that, it's normal. It's supposed to happen this way. I had, nobody to tell me, okay, this is wrong, this is right.
You need to put her down. No!
The mothers at this center work hard to help their children feel secure at school and at home. But it can be frustrating when children get out of control.
If you don't want to play, then you should get off. I'm not going to play with her anymore next time.
Okay. Well, why are you angry at her?
Because I am.
I wonder why. I wonder why.
I'm sick.
You're being mad? She left. You weren't playing with her. I wonder why you're mad. You don't want to talk about it? Okay.
Leave.
You want me to leave you alone? No me pegues, que no me gusta. Okay, yo no te estoy... No me pegues. No me pegues. I don't like to be hit. No, I'm not going to let you hurt me. I'm not going to let you hurt me.
You're not going to let me hurt myself here?
No, I'm not.
Then let me go.
You need to understand that you cannot hurt me. I'm not hurting you. I'm not going to let you hurt me. I don't understand why you're so mad. I don't know why you got so angry.
What made you mad? It's so hard to have a child who's having a tantrum, and so many parents feel that what they need to do is to somehow stop the tantrum. And, my message is, don't stop the tantrum. The tantrum is that child's present way of expressing to you what they're feeling. Listen to it. I see you're so angry. I use the word mirror. Mirror back their feelings. I'm so glad you're telling me how mad you are. You can have all those feelings, and I'm here for you. You did good. You were really...
Yeah, you did very good.
She did do good.
I'm proud of her. Because I would have been, whew.
But the fact is that you're very clear that she couldn't hurt you. She can be angry, but she can't hurt you. And I know it's hard. That was really good.
She's being mad.
She's going to get over it. Whatever went wrong, she's going to get over it. You were very clear you had a limit, and now she'll be okay. But if you hit her back for something like that, then your words don't have any meaning, right? Because don't hurt, but I'm going to hurt you. So that was good. You did good. If a child grows up with a lot of threats, even if they're never hit, but it's always the fear of losing or fear of being abandoned or fear of being something awful happening, that there's no way you can feel safe in the world. We get panicked.
The safety and comfort that mothers feel at this center make it a healing place for them. They feel important and respected, and their children do too.
Here at this school, I feel that her eyes get so bright when I tell her she's gonna come here. She could express herself, she could talk about her feelings, she gives ideas. She's like a person here, she counts here.
A place where children and their parents feel safe enough to talk about their feelings, to give ideas, to believe they count. That place can be called a safe haven. When violence comes into any of our lives, it is easy to feel that we are helpless and that we lack the strength to protect the children in our care. But the kind of strength that children need from us does not require that we fix everything. It is the strength to pay attention to the violence that children may see or hear about, the strength to be aware of what they say and do, the strength to work with other adults to make safe places for all children, and the strength from time to time to look for help. And if we do these things, it is likely that the children, when they are grown, will remember us, their parents, their teachers, and the other adults in their lives as the grown-ups who were willing to use our strengths to keep them safe so they could play and learn and grow.
One of the reasons why I like to put this video to start this conversation, guys, folks, is because what we're going to be talking about today is really difficult stuff. We're going to see other another video which is really very, very heartbreaking. And when we talk about children's exposure to violence, especially about children's exposure to domestic violence, we're talking about things that are very, very hard to deal with. I know that you all deal with child abuse and neglect, that you all are in your work very, very much in contact with these kinds of things. But the truth of the matter is that we need to know that at the end of the day, our role is not to fix it or to take it away. Our role is to really lend whatever strength we have in the position that we have to be able to support our kids. So though it is hard work, though we're going to be talking about issues that touch us personally and in our role as professionals very deeply, the one important message at the end of the day is that there are some things that you can do. It is not all lost. There are some things that you can do and that you can help with. Let me ask you all, what kinds of violence are kids exposed in Louisiana? Kids, and I'm talking kids and youth. What kinds of violence in general are kids exposed to?
I see a lot of verbal abuse.
Bullying type of things, abuse that's verbal, yes. Come on, we don't need to wake up.
I think they experience violence from their peers.
Violence from their peers, okay. So verbal abuse, violence from their peers, yes? Violence in television programs are that even programs for kids are sometimes very, very violent. Cartoons sometimes are very violent. What else?
On the street.
On the street, what kind of violence in the street?
Anywhere from shootings, muggings.
So seeing folks being in situations where that happens, okay? Physical violence, okay? Domestic violence, okay?
Water-related disasters.
That's exactly right. Water-related disasters and hurricanes and nature-made kinds of things, yes. And their response to it. That's a very violent part of it too. Yes. What else? Yes?
Incest. Incest.
Incest, sexual abuse and incest? Yes. Oops, I'm sorry. I thought you raised your hand. There is a place here if you want to come and sit. Other types of violence, guys. Louisiana must be a very peaceful place. I don't see you all.
I don't see how we here are different than the violence that is seen in other places.
No.
We used to be a very family-oriented culture, but I see that disintegrating.
Okay. So we mentioned bullying, we mentioned verbal abuse, domestic abuse. Any animal abuse here? School shootings, have that ever happened here? Not often, but it's there. How about the music? Music lyrics. All of that is there? How about dating violence? Is that a common, or do you know that it happens? How about child abuse and neglect? What more violent than that? So in areas like where I come from, there is even what we call road rage that kids are exposed to now. Areas where very, very heavy traffic, where people are angry and tense and nervous of being in a place where they have to wait, and there's a lot of violence going around. A small study that was conducted, very small, but still meaningful, conducted in Washington, D.C. at a daycare center, measured the level of aggression and hyperactivity in very young children and compared it to where they were coming from. How long did it take for them to come in the car? And although this was not a scientific study because really it didn't control for many other variables, the truth of the matter is that children that were coming from far away places, that we're assuming are in traffic for a long time, were kids that were much more easily distracted and nervous and tense than kids that were not. Talking about very young kids, and not a very scientific poll, but yes, one that was very real. I see yourself
Probably at the grocery store.
at the grocery store sometimes. Yes, yes. Besides, of course, the aggression and the violence that goes with discrimination, with poverty, with everything that's associated with it. So as we can see, and I don't know that you can read very well the triangle that you have. You have it in your PowerPoint, but you can't see it. So I'm going to tell you what it really says. And if you see the bottom of the triangle, the higher number of proportion of children that are affected, the first one thing that we see is entertainment violence. Entertainment violence, what we were talking about, the media, the songs, the lyrics. Those of you that work with preschool children or that deal with preschool children or are parents or grandparents of preschool children know that we sometimes are saying no guns, nothing that's violent in the classrooms, and yet our kids will take a block and go, and we protect kids from that. And yes, they've seen it everywhere else, and therefore they're reproducing that. We have many of the video games that are extremely, extremely violent. When there was the 9/11 attacks, some kids were reacting as, if I stop the TV or if I stop the videotape, this is going to stop, because this is what we see on video games all the time. So the entertainment violence is something that affects a great majority of our children. The next level, which is, again, the proportion of children is less children are affected by that, is exposure to what we call real world violence shown in the media. And if we all have our TV on the whole day, if we all look at the front page of the newspapers, wars, Katrina, all of the very horrendous things that we see on the media, September 11 was one of them, is one that children still have. It's very separate from them, but they still have a difficult time saying how much that is going to affect them at some point in their life. The third one is isolated, traumatic, direct exposure to violence in home and the community. Somebody saying the shootings, the gang things that we see sometimes. And the last one, the less amount of children are affected by it. However, it is the most important one in terms of impact, is of course the direct violence against them in the home and in the community. Why do you think? So, hold on, let me stop before I ask that question. The proportion of children affected is lower as we go to the top. The impact on the children is higher as we get to the top. And the other thing that's important about this triangle is that it's cumulative. So the more we're seeing 1, 2, and 3, the more when we get to 4 or 1 and 2, the more as we get to the top of the triangle, the children will be affected. It is a cumulative process that gets there. So I want to go back now and ask you, the question that I'm asking you is, why do you think that the violence in the apex of the triangle number 4 is the one that is most impactful on children? More personal. What do you mean by more personal? Direct. They feel themselves to be the recipients of the violence? Any other reason why you think that violence in number 4 would be? Yes?
I think a lot of times it's about people that they know and trust, and it breaks that trust.
Mm-hmm. It is about people that their trust, and it breaks that trust. Yes?
Probably can't escape it like they can with a game or television.
You can't shut it off. It's there, and it's beyond you. Very good.
Also because there's no outlet to talk about it. I mean, if it's in your home, it's a private thing. You don't have basically nowhere to share that information with or go out to seek the help that you may need.
Because you keep it inside, because you don't want to go out and wash your dirty linens outside. You don't want to talk about this, and you're afraid that consequences of talking it with somebody else, so they can keep it all inside. And at some point, as you saw in the film, it becomes normal. You think that this is the way everybody lives. There is no difference on it. Any other reason why you think that the apex of the triangle is more important than the other?
Well, it's in their face. They can't turn it off like the TV.
Mm-hmm. It's in their face, their violence. Yes, yes.
I think sometimes, too, it makes them feel guilty, like perhaps they caused it.
Mm-hmm. Because so many times in the, especially in cases of domestic violence, their children are used so much as in between the parents or to attack the other parent, the batterer, that they may think that they're responsible for that. So because it is more personal, because you cannot talk about it, because you can feel more, because the people that you're supposed to be trusting, or the places that you're supposed to be trusting. School is a very trusted place. It's where you feel safe. When something like that happens at school or at home, these are the places where you're supposed to be feeling safe. And where that myth is shattered, then the impact that it's going to have on your life is going to be the greatest. And so what we see with the impact of violence, of exposure to violence on children, is that it goes from a continuum. We saw the continuum going from, the isolated media experiences or toy entertainment to the actual very personal, in-your-face that you cannot talk about it. And so we see this in a continuum that we call the stress to trauma continuum. All youth, all children, all of us here in this room experience stressful situations. Correct? We are all at our time, sometimes in our life, experiencing stressful situations. Either directly or indirectly, because somebody else is in a situation that makes us worry, makes us nervous, etc. Some of the stress that we feel we can call positive stress, because it is the stress that's going to make us have a sense of mastery. Let's just think about the first day you go to school. That's a pretty stressful event. No matter when and how, it is a pretty stressful event. You're going to go, and if it's at 2 months, or if it's in a daycare, or if it's at 6 years when you go to a teacher, it is a pretty stressful event. It's a normative event. It's something that we all need to go through as a parent, as a child, but it is still stressful. We call it stress, we call it positive, because once you've mastered that, you have a sense of mastery. You really are in a position where you're doing something developmentally that is going to put you in a better place. All of you here have taken at some points in your life, maybe you don't want to remember, but sometimes you have taken a test. Okay? When you enter the test, you were quite stressed, or the time before taking the test, you were quite stressed. This is something that you went through, you studied, you prepared, you did what you had to do. Once you did it, many times, then you were better off for that. So what I'm saying is, we cannot deal with stress as this is something that's always negative. something that makes us look for a better job, something, the adrenaline in our body lets us seek more information when we don't have it. And so it contributes to what we have, and it contributes to us getting a sense of mastery of something. Then we have what we call the tolerable stress. And tolerable stress are those incidents we saw some in the apex, where they are more difficult to deal with, but they're isolated, that happen one time. For example, many of us, or many of our children, have gone through the death of a pet. Or, taking it even one step further, we have gone through the death of a grandparent, of a beloved grandparent. Correct? That's a very stressful event for a young child. Very stressful, very sad. And yet, it is one time that it happens, and with the passage of time, and critically important, with the support of adults around that, they are usually worked out. If this child does not work out this, if the child becomes the child or the adult, it's not only the child. If any one of us with the tolerable stress becomes totally depressed, it's seen as a sign that something did not go well. Correct? If we have the appropriate supports, if we have the appropriate way of dealing with it, this is part of normal life. That's what we call tolerable stress, and it's a one-time event. Even one-time shooting event that you may be in, one-time car accident. Anyone here has had a car accident that was pretty scary? Eventually you get over it, correct? It is, however, what we call toxic stress, and it's that top of the apex that you saw, which is ongoing, it's chronic, it's experience without supports, the inability to go out and talk to somebody about it, and having people understand where you are, as you were mentioning, in your face, and most importantly, all the time, ongoing. There is no escape for it. What that causes in our in all of us is an overwhelming fear and an overwhelming anxiety. All of you here have, at some point in your lives, and I would imagine Katrina would be foremost in your mind, but at some point in your life, you all have had a feeling of overwhelming fear. Can anybody think about situations where you've had overwhelming fear? Anybody ready to? Besides the storm, yes. Well, or even the storm. That's if that's the worst that you. Say that again.
That's the one that comes to mind.
Sure. I'm sure with all of you. Okay, well, the storm. So all of you had some part on being in the storm and having overwhelming fear. Correct? I can assume that. Maybe it's a large assumption, but I can assume that. What did you do? What was your body like? Tell me what your body was like.
All sorts of chronic sinus and I forgot what it's called, but it's something to do with chickenpox.
So you had physical reactions. Your immune system sort of collapsed, and you had allergies, and you had chickenpox, and your immune system just was not ready to combat anything. It just shut off. Correct? Anyone else in terms of feelings that you have, either at the storm or elsewhere? Has anyone here had been mugged or been in a situation? Yes.
In the early 50s, we thought we were going to be attacked by the Russians, and that's when they were doing
the tryouts and
they were making those shelters.
Yes.
And I can remember, remembering how scared everybody was at school. I mean, we really sick.
Sure.
And myself. because we really thought we were going to be
Sure. You thought that you had somebody behind you and that they were going to come. Can you sort of remember the feelings or what you did?
Physical sensation, you know, in your stomach, in your whole body. Had a real physical.
So you have all of that anxiety that comes to your body, correct? Anybody else that has had an experience with a mugging, a shooting, any of that?
In relation to what she was saying, I remember when my father in the Second World War left to go overseas. I was 6. And the separation anxiety was terrible, just really bad.
Yeah,
My
it's a
mother
fear
didn't
that...
know how to drive, and it was like, well, what's going to happen?
Right. The people you depended on were really not going to be there for you. And that created in you an overwhelming anxiety. I think somebody raised their hand. No. So what happens when you are in a situation of fear, of overwhelming fear, not the fear that we have, sometimes on a daily basis, but overwhelming fear, is that your body starts producing what's called cortisol. The adrenaline starts going up, correct? And then, and this happens when you are the subject of the threat, or, as you're saying, when somebody that you love, your caregiver, your teacher, somebody that protects you is in there. And so you start having these feelings and these physical reactions to the stress. It's what we call the flight or fight response. You're ready to run, you're ready to hit, you're ready to do something with all that adrenaline in your body. It triggers biological response, it triggers a cognitive response. You can only see so much because your energy is focused on the event. It definitely triggers an emotional response. And usually when the event subsides, what happens is your body gets, with a little bit of time, it's not immediate, but it gets back to normal. It gets back to where you were before. Okay, so it shuts off the response. Now, what happens when there is an overwhelming fear that's there all the time that you cannot do anything about it? What happens if you cannot really figure out what you're going to do without your dad, but it continues to be an anxiety, is that your body never shuts off. It continues to be in the same place. And for children, as they're growing up, it limits their ability to spend their energy anywhere else. That's where it's at. Even if the element of fear that was not there, it's not there all the time, it's in their system, and they have a heightened system of response, and they cannot lower that. It has been shown, folks, it has been shown by research that children that are exposed to this kind of overwhelming stressor, which is called complex trauma, it's also called traumatic experience, it's called exposure to violence, because of the response of the body, that they cannot shut this off, and that at the end of development, their brain chemistry is different. Their brains are smaller, they're wired in a different way. It has also been shown by research and by medical experience that if children in overwhelming conditions such as what I'm talking about are given the supports and the interventions to deal with the event, which is happening anyway, they are able to shut off their response. So in a way, it is a very humbling experience to know that subjecting children to this, children are subject to this for many, many years, and in repeated circumstances, their brain chemistry, their wiring is going to be different. They will have issues related to cognition, to learning, to social development. But the other side of it is, with the presence of a supportive adult or environment, this can be stopped. And that's where the important thing is for all of you to understand because you are seeing kids in your practice, in everyday practice, that are exactly what we're talking about. And it is sometimes, I'm sure that if I had asked you even before you heard me this morning, and one of the reasons why you're here is that you know that this is bad for children. It could not be good for children, correct? However, we cannot stop at thinking that this is bad for children. We need to understand how it's bad for children, or what is making for children, and how their relationship with you, with their families, with everybody around them is affected in order to be able to intervene. Because we're saying that the level of stressor and the level of response depends on many factors, as the ongoing quality of it, as the presence of a supportive adult or a supportive environment, as you saw in the film that we saw at the beginning, not every life stressor has the same impact on children. As a matter of fact, I can tell you that not all of the children are affected by exposure to violence. What we need to know is we need to know how these experiences affect this particular child, and most importantly for all of you here today is how you are going to work to create the safe haven that this child needs in order to be able to move forward. Any question, any doubt, any saying that's not true? Hi, are you all with me? Okay, well, as we're talking about exposure to violence and how to understand where the child is, which is what we're going to be trying to do, because we're saying we know that it can potentially be something very, impactful on the child. We also are going to start thinking about how do we view exposure to violence when we're looking at the child in terms of their his or her development. Why is that? It's because, as I said before, we're going to see the symptoms of exposure to violence in kids that are next to us in school, in family relationships, in everything that they do. And many times the symptoms that we see are symptoms that we see not only on kids exposed to violence. The symptoms that we see are symptoms that we see on kids that are really having issues with stressors or with many other things. And when we are trying to figure out how we're gonna help them, we're going to really try to attend to where that child is and assess and screen where that child is in order to be able to move forward. And the way that we look at it from the perspective of the adults that are going to be providing kids with the supports that they need is what we call the impact of exposure to violence in developmental tasks. So at each developmental task, you all have studied some child development, and you know that when the child is an infant, the major task of infancy is to develop an attachment. And so when we have issues of violence or exposure to violence, even in kids before they're born, and certainly during the first months of life, kids have a very difficult time developing attachment. And the development of attachment, as you all know, is what's going to be the basis for the children later on to develop all other relationships. Tell me, why do you think that children exposed to violence would have, especially to domestic violence, would have difficulties with attachment? It breaks the trust. How so? How would it break the trust?
I guess the people they're closest to are hurting.
The people that are close to them are hurting. So what do you, as an adult, if you're hurting, what happens in your relationship with your child? Yes?
You're not able to focus and attend to that child's
Absolutely. You are not there for the child because you are dealing with your own issues of that. And if we don't respond to the child in an appropriate way, the child cannot develop the trust and therefore cannot develop the attachment. And if the child does not develop the attachment to the folks that are closest to them, the caregivers that are closer to them, what happens when they get to the stage where they are to develop friendships and go to school and start building on what you do when you're 3 or 4? You don't trust anybody. You don't have that bond that was the basis of your development in the world, and therefore you don't trust that. So this lack of attachment and of bonding at very early stages is something that's going to affect them throughout their lives. This is very, very important, and especially important in the issue of children that are exposed to domestic violence. It is very important because we have very mixed ways of dealing with children exposed to violence. The big question, if I ask any one of you just randomly, do you think that exposure to living in a home where there is domestic violence affects a child? What would you respond? Yes. How does it affect the child? It depends on the child. How so?
Every child's personality is different, so they handle stressors and
Okay.
children will become violent themselves, and others will become very internal with their
Okay. Any other way in which domestic violence can affect the child?
The parents can be demonstrating normal mom-dad relationship. I mean, teach the girl to think that's normal, because mom and dad know each other or whatever. So
He's learning the different, what he's learning are not the right ways to relating between parent and child. Right. He's in a place where condoning violence is what happens. Right. And so, and also, very, very importantly, the co-occurrence of domestic violence and child abuse is very, very high. If there is domestic violence in a home, it is likely that there may be child abuse and neglect. Some studies have even shown it to be 60 to 80% of the cases. Now, what happens when we give this just basic information about children and exposure to domestic violence? Is that when a child is referred to the child protection system, to the child welfare system, and the system knows that there is domestic violence, what is the tendency of the court or of the CPS worker? What is the normal tendency if you know that the child is being harmed in a situation? To remove the child from that. What is the tendency from teachers? I'm saying the tendency because obviously it's not there for everybody. But what is the tendency of teachers if they know that the child is being hurt in their own house? Huh? To report it, obviously, because that's the law. But it's the tendency is to want to take this child away from the parent. It's to change the parent. It's to really do something with the parent. These are mean parents that are hurting their kids. Correct? Am I lying? Not always, but most of the time. I'm sorry, you were going to say something?
I was saying that's very accurate.
Yeah. So the issue, and if you as child advocates are in a situation where you're in a place where a parent is doing something that you think is wrong for the child, your tendency is to blame the parent for that. Correct? Okay. Well, the same exact thing happens in domestic violence. And the issue with that, guys, is that if you are thinking that what you need to do is separate the child from this family because this is hurtful for the family, for the child, what you're doing is you're increasing the possibility that the child will be traumatized. Why? Because sometimes taking the child out of that home is worse than having the child experience the domestic violence. Correct? Say that again? It can be, the actual process of separating a child from a family where there is abuse, where there is domestic violence, can be more traumatic than the domestic violence itself. Separating the families. It also increases the possibility that you don't talk about it. You don't say a word, or moms who are in a domestic violence, usually moms, it's not always mom, but usually moms who are battered and are in a domestic violence situation will never talk about it because they're very concerned that you're going to take the child away. And if the mother is not going to talk about it and the domestic violence is going to be there, the child is going to be in front of this every single day. Correct? So you are really in a position where you have to make, in a way, Solomonic decisions without really having the resources to do those decisions, to make those decisions, unless you know how this child is being affected and when there is risk and where there is the risk of harm and where is actually the place where you need to be working with both the family and the child, and holding that batterer accountable for the work that's happening. Okay? Any question about this? Any disagreement? It's a very touchy subject, and that's why I'm asking you to bear with me and tell me where you're thinking that it might not be that way. Yes?
I personally agree too that a lot of times it is more traumatic to take the child out of the environment. But what is the alternative to that when a child is getting harmed or whatever?
There is no alternative in the case that the child is getting hurt. There is no alternative in the case that there is child abuse and neglect concurrent to that. The problem is that domestic violence situations are not always very easy to determine, and that the risk to the child is not very easy to determine. Yes, in the case that you're mentioning, there is no doubt that if there is harm to the child should be placed. And placed with a lot of supports and help that would, help him or her move out and then support the mom. Taking the child out of the home by itself is not going to be a solution to either problem. But the issue is that there's many times when that fine line is not clear. I would even go as far as saying that there are many times in your practice with child welfare folks that you don't know if there is domestic violence or not.
When you use the word harm in that context, are you talking about physical harm or neglect that causes a physical danger?
I'm talking about physical harm, and I'm talking also about cases where neglect results in physical harm. Yes.
What are the odds if, let's say, the mother is being physically abused by her partner? What are the odds that that's not spilling over into physical abuse for the child?
There is the likelihood is that I'm saying there is a co-occurrence that's very high. Sometimes the fact that there is child abuse, that there is domestic violence, almost predicts that there will be child abuse and neglect. It's likely. But it's not for sure. And the issue is, what do we do with that information? How do we move that? And what do we understand by domestic violence, and how intense that is too? The issue also with domestic violence, of course, is that there are many, besides the actual presence of being in the presence of domestic violence, as we talked before with the toxic stress impacting on the child, there are two other areas that we need to talk about when we're talking about the child welfare system. The first one is, of course, we have to evaluate how the domestic violence in the home, either by directly being a part of it or by indirectly hearing sounds or being part of the fights or having a mother or a father use the child as a peon. It is because of you that I'm doing this. All of these factors, besides the experiencing domestic violence in the as toxic stress, the other key important piece about domestic violence in child welfare is the impact that the domestic violence has on parenting behavior. Now we know that when we're assessing children when we're assessing in child welfare, one of the areas that we assess definitely is what we call the parental protective capacity, correct? Or the parenting ability. Most of the CPS case plans include some kind of parenting class. Now, why are we sending people to parenting class?
Well, they're lacking parenting skills.
Okay, so what do you mean when you say they're lacking parenting skills? That's really why we're doing it.
I think, in my experience, it's the inability of the parent to put their personal feelings behind those of the child. They tend to take care of themselves before their child.
Okay.
Maybe it's immaturity.
Whatever the reason is, you're evaluating, how the parent is relating to the child and whether they're putting their needs before the needs of the child. So we're trying to improve parental capacity. There is no way that we can say that battered individuals in a domestic violence situations are all bad parents. And the reason why we can't say that is because many of the actions that they're taking may be to protect the child in a domestic violence situation. Correct? So when we are assessing parental capacity, which is one of the key issues that we all assess in child welfare, we need to assess whether how the domestic violence is impacting in that capacity. We also tend to assess the mother's protective capacity. Correct? And domestic violence includes the father or the partner or the male or the batterer, in the case that it's not a male, in the home. And there are very few programs that are evaluating or assessing the father's capacity to parent. So when we're taking the child away from the home, what we're doing is saying both parents cannot, or usually the mom, who is the one that's with the child, cannot protect this child. But we're not assessing at all how the batterer is doing that. There is no accountability for the batterer, and there's also no assessment of what the batterer's disciplining methods and what the batterer is doing to protect this child. And when we send parents to parenting classes, I'm not sure about New York, about Louisiana, but I can tell you that in most of the country, parenting classes are so generic and so loose that they really do not deal with any of this. And so we have parents of teenagers that go into parenting classes who are learning how a 2-year-old develops and what a baby should be doing and how attachment develops. Not that that's totally out of the picture, because they will be parents at some point in their life, but not now. And we really assess parental capacity by the fact that they went to the parenting classes, and not in any way by how they improve their parenting. So again, when we're looking at child welfare, we're looking first at the experience of child welfare, experience of toxic stress in the child. What's that causing? Where that child is, what's causing that? Secondly, we're assessing parental capacity. We do sometimes a much better job, not always, but a much better job looking at foster parents' protective capacity or kin protective capacity than we do, because we have them assessed in many other ways that parents are not, that the biological parents are not assessed. And so that's another thing that happens in terms of protective capacity. We know of cases where the child has been removed out of the house because of domestic violence, and they're placed in violent homes, foster homes, which re-traumatizes the child the same way. This also happens, by the way, when we're placing with kin, because there are many times when you place with kin, and kin are in these same circumstances. So those are some of the issues that we need to look at. We're talking about the first one. We looked at the second. Now, there is a third level that we need to look at in the child welfare system. And it is the fact that the child welfare system, by its nature, can be a cause of traumatic experience. Going through the system is already a traumatic experience in its own. From the day that the child there is the investigation of child abuse and neglect, there could be already potential risk for the batterer and for the battered person in that relationship. Why? Because you all know that when domestic violence is about power and control. It's about purposeful power and control, not something that's done, by agreement between the partners. And so when there is the threat that the system will come in and deal with and work with, realize that there is this, somebody else has the control. When a woman leaves the situation, when the battered person leaves the situation, this is a time of heightened danger. Why? Because they lose the control. So if somebody comes in and deals with that, if we don't have the appropriate skills to do you all do here family team meetings? At the beginning of the case in child welfare, where you get all of the family? If we don't deal with the domestic violence before the family team meeting, we're aggravating a circumstance where the batterer must be in most danger. So many of the family strategies that we have put in place to protect families and to avoid separation of families from their the disruption of family life are things that may be hurting that. So we have to see at each point in the transition in the child welfare system, we have to be able to assess whether the going into the system, whether the actions that we take within the system are going to aggravate the stress for the child. So if at intake, if we have a 2-year-old or a 1-year-old who is in a domestic violence situation at a time when attachment and bonding are especially critical, and we're taking the system decides to take this child out, and there is no contact between the mom and this child while the child goes out, that may be a lot more hurtful than having the child be in a situation where this attachment can happen. So at any point of intake, from intake to termination of parental rights at the other extreme, or reunification, we need to be very well aware of the critical issues of exposure to violence to make an informed decision that's not going to add to the stress of already being there. So this is the 3 pieces, guys, that I want you to remember if you don't remember anything else about today. We need to look and have a pretty clear picture of the child and the experience of the child of the domestic violence. We need to have an assessment of how this is impacting on the child, which means that you need to know what are the protective factors in the child's life. And work with the protective factors, because the only way that you're going to be able to help this family is by building on this resilience and protective factors and decreasing the risks. That's the way that you can help. The second piece is you need to look at the issue of parental protective capacity from the perspective of the victim, of the batterer, and of the kin family or the foster family. What needs need to have on these different possibilities that could support this child, again, to build the resilience and to decrease the risk at which the child is exposed, to create the safe haven for the child. And the third one is you need to know at each step of the system in which ways the policies and practices and strategies of the system can be helpful, or the flip side of the coin can be more hurtful when you're working with this child. I would like to have some comments from you and hear what your reaction to this is, or questions or disagreements, or I'd like this to be a lot less about me talking and about hearing from you. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay. If we know that there's domestic violence in the home, okay, and then there's a fine line between, if you remove the child, causing more damage, or leave them, that kind of thing. A lot of times, OCS will go in and offer family services in order to not remove the child from the home.
Good.
And they'll work with them to no avail. They're still abused, the mom won't leave, the daddy won't go to anger management classes. Then it's it's necessary at that point, I would think, to remove the child, because mom's not taking advantage of the services, daddy's not using the services, the violence is still there.
That's a very real dilemma. It's not only that the mom may not leave, but even if there is a restraining order, the mom is accepting the dad again in the home. Correct? Yeah. So many times that happens. Let's just stop for a couple of seconds and think about why and I'm going to talk about moms or women, although I'm fully aware that there are some men that are in these situations now, but because the prevalence is women, I'm going to talk about women to make it more clear. In a domestic violence situations, can you tell me why women stay in a relationship? Fear of what?
Yeah. Fear of the unknown.
Fear of the unknown, of being on their own. So lack of ability to see what they would do in the future without that. Very good. Yes. Financial, absolutely. Financial, meaning housing, meaning how to pay the rent, meaning all of that. What else? Absolutely. They love the guy and they want to change the guy. They don't want to change their family situation. Correct. What else?
Brainwashing. The abuser has brainwashed them into thinking that they're no good, don't deserve anything.
So they've internalized all these messages that the abuser has given them about how they're not worth anything, and they really have internalized that. Very good. What else?
a lack of resources, both external and internal resources.
External, I think it's in terms of financial and economic and employment.
Taking people in the person's life away from them, you know, separating them from people who could be a resource or support system.
So in the domestic violence situation, the batterer has managed to separate this person from friends and supports and resources, and now the person finds themselves completely isolated.
They also feel embarrassed about being exposed.
Absolutely. They feel embarrassed about the stigma that we were talking. We don't talk about that. Yes. What else?
Usually after the batterer is battered, everything's, oh, I'm sorry, I did it, I won't ever do it again, and he attempts to say that it won't.
There is a cycle, and sometimes this cycle has good times, and then that, with all of what we've been saying, we don't want to change the good things, we only want to change the bad things. Correct? What else?
She may be a child.
She may
have been raised in a domestic violence situation.
Absolutely. It's normal. That's the way it is.
And the opposite too. She may not have been raised in that situation and may not even know what's happening. It may take her a while to figure out the dynamics of that.
Okay, so the fact is, she may know or not know that what she's living is so abnormal or so that she needs to deal with it. Right. And these are all very clear issues that happen in domestic violence situation. And I would add to that the fact that they're scared, somebody mentioned scared, not only about their future, which is really true, but also about the fact that they know if they leave, they may be hurt, or their kids may be taken away, or they may be hurt, because that's a very unsafe time to leave. Correct? Now, these are the reasons why women, or the batterer, I'm trying to not be sexist on this video, the battered person may not leave. What in the community, what in the culture, what in the systems are foundations or are supporting all of these?
Religion.
Absolutely, religion, because if they go, it's really not religion, it's the interpretation of religion, because there's no religion that condones domestic violence. But it's the belief that some of the main preachers, rabbis, priests, they're responsible for the religion put out, that if you are a woman and you are in a battery, you decided to marry this person, that's your lot and you need to be keeping there. Religion is a very important one. What else? Say? Family beliefs. What could those family beliefs be?
For years and years, I stuck it out with mine.
That's right.
You need to stick it out with, you know,
That's
the
correct.
generational.
It happened with my brother, with my sister, with my, this and that, and therefore that's the way it is. It's normal in some ways as it is. Yes, and that's, by the way, that's one of the reasons why when I talk about these issues, guys, and I talk in the Latino community, they will tell me, oh, in the Latino community, it's so prevalent, it's part of the culture. I go to an African American community and they tell me exactly the same thing. It's in the African American community, it's so prevalent, it's everywhere. I go to a Native American community, they say exactly the same thing. And it is because there is a pattern of repetition that happens. Folks that have been in domestic violence situations are usually have difficulties both with parenting their children and with partnering, with finding partners that are different. But let's stick to what we're saying. So what are the factors? We mentioned religion, we mentioned family. What are other factors that are allowing these ideas to happen, to flourish, that don't allow women to leave? Stigma, do you think that stigma is still about being a single parent or being abused? Or?
Well, I think that it can be either way.
Okay.
I think that when a woman has especially multiple children,
Yes.
she's afraid to be on her own because she feels
Sure. especially if it's for multiple fathers and what people would consider and that, yes. Stigma associated with it. Yes?
Some women do stay for the prestige if they're married to someone who has money.
Yes.
Regardless of the infidelity,
Yes.
abuse.
Yes.
They're still married to.
Yes, and that could be religion, but it also could be, sort of in upper income educated households, you don't talk about these things, and it's a lot harder to lose that status that you have. So with all of these things, guys, we have a foundation that's very, very strong, supporting women to stay in domestic violence situations. We have a host of reasons why women cannot leave. May not want to leave, may choose not to leave because of many of these reasons. And on top of that, we have a whole sort of list of resources, lack of resources, that we cannot make available for women that may break out of that situation. So trying to deal with that, and we have to do it when we have an individual case, but we need to look at the whole situation in order to see, for example, where the child is being placed. What are the services that this woman or this battered person is receiving so that we can deal with issues about resources, about lack of employment, and about that. An anger management class, I'm sorry, that ain't gonna make it. Okay? We need to work with dads on fathering after violence. We have seen that programs of fathering after violence can help fathers be more involved and more decisive about their limiting their aggression and their domestic violence more than actually anger management, because being involved with the child is something that they may want to do. So I guess what I'm saying is I don't have a solution for this particular family that you're talking about. And I think it's a very difficult thing for the child protection worker that has to make those Solomonic decisions. But until we have a public awareness campaign with religious, with teachers, with families, with the public system about these issues, until we really assess where this family is and why is it that they can or cannot leave.
I think a lot of it too is their mental capacity.
Their mental capacity.
If they're developmentally delayed,
Yes.
I work with, we were talking about that. You can send them to the classes, they can get the certificate, but if they can't retain it and then implement it,
There are many ongoing cognitive and emotional problems with folks, as we have seen, that have been in these kinds of relationships. We also cannot expect them from one day to the next to get it. So that's where the supports come in, and that's where the assessment of each one of these families is the important thing. But and you may have to remove, and you may have to do that. By no means I'm saying that you shouldn't do that. I'm just saying before you do it, look at the issues that are impacting here, and educate your colleagues, your friends. You're here because you know already some about this. But how many of your colleagues think that these women, if they don't leave, it's because they don't deserve to have a second chance? How many people think that it's all about substance abuse? If we take care of the substance abuse, everything else will be complete. Am I inventing this? Okay. How many of the families that you work with have this idea that it is your lot? That if you were in a domestic, that's what everybody in your family has done. And how do you place a child who's in a family like this with a kin family? How many of the foster parents that you work with, the most wonderful people that do this work, and God bless them, because I don't know what we would do with them. How many of them think this child needs to be separated from this abusive family because these parents are fighting and they cannot How many of you do training for foster parents, for attorneys, and for child protection workers on the impact of exposure to violence on children and the factors that they need to address? So the next part of what we're going to talk about right now is, as I said when we were describing it, I am going to try to focus right now on the need for you to engage the parents. And when I say parents or families, I'm talking again about biological, foster, and adoptive families in order to be able to do the work that you want to do. You, especially those of you that are attorneys and have to make these, again, Solomonic decisions about, what to do in these very, very difficult cases where there is really no clear answer. I think that the best recommendation I can give you, besides looking at the 3 areas where that I mentioned, is really to try to engage the parents in doing the work. Because, and I'm talking here again about the range of parents, but also including the batterer and seeing what kinds of not only punishing strategies you can engage the batterer to be able to change some of this dynamic. Why is it critically important to work with the parents? It's because the only way we're going to break this cycle, and we're seeing that it's a cycle that goes multi-generationally and in several communities, is to really engage the people that are the stakeholders in the process. I think that those of us that are here are definitely wanting to do it, but we cannot do it if we don't really align ourselves with those folks. And because as we have, I think we saw in the film that you saw at the beginning, and I've been talking about, it is clear that creating a safe haven and building up the resilience of supporting adults is what's going to be the most important factor for children. Even if you can, and even if you have the resources to send the child and refer the child and require the child, as attorneys, you have the authority and the resources probably to do that. Even if you do that in mental health interventions, even if you send your kids to programs like Joe Osofsky, who is the top of the line in terms of therapeutic intervention or any other of the evidence base that we have, even if you do that, if you do not change the environment where this child is going to spend the rest of his growing years, the chances are that we're going to see this repeat itself. It certainly is helpful. It certainly would be better. It certainly, I would recommend it for everybody that wants to break this child cycle. But the truth is, if we don't engage the parents and the families, we're not going to be able to do that. And in order to do that, we have to do ourselves and the families that we're working 2 basic things. Yes, we need to raise the awareness. I'm hoping that today your awareness is raised about the importance of doing this. Because if you don't believe it's important, it's not going to happen. But the second thing is we need to change our practice. And so we need to review what we do day by day, and we do in what I call automatic pilot. This is the way I see things. This is the way I do them every morning. You're not starting every day thinking, oh my God, how am I going to approach this problem today? You really become, when you are experienced, it becomes your automatic response to things. And it is this what we need to change. This is the most important thing, is to look beyond what you have been doing every day, which I'm sure has been successful, and I'm sure it's been good, or you wouldn't be here. But it's still, what are some of the areas that I can begin to change if I have the awareness that this is an important thing? We need to be very, very conscious that there is definitely barriers and obstacles to change, and to changing our practice, and to changing and to working with the families. The biggest one, New Orleans, Louisiana, is actually one place where this plays out very well, but it plays out in all of the sections of the country, is poverty, single parent status, and stress. And what that means is that when you have resources problems, when you're a single parent and you're working, you have 3-4 kids, you have to keep food on the table, you have to do all of these things, and you have plenty of stressors in your life, this is really not seen as a priority. What happens in domestic violence is, okay, I'll put up with it, I'll do this, you know what, I have too many things in my mind to be able right now to focus on changing my life so that this is going to happen. That is a very, very real obstacle that we have. There are concrete obstacles, and you know that in the work that you do. Time, sending people to a litany of classes and supports and therapies and this, when you have a full-time job and you're a single parent and have to put food on the table, transportation, childcare, etc. The following one, and this is especially true when you're working with families in the child welfare system, is the stigma about your parenting skills. You are 10 minutes. You are there and you are doing this work in child welfare. The fact that child welfare is involved in your life means that you're not a good parent. That's what it means. That you're not enough.
And I find they feel that when you say they don't have proper parenting skills, they get very defensive and immediately think, but I do love my child.
Yes, right.
It's a big difference between
Right.
loving your child and, of course, having good parenting skills.
Right. But it happens to all of us here. If somebody comes and tells us that we're not parenting our children correctly, we feel very defensive. Because we do what we learned to do in our family of origin. And as screwed up as we all are, we still think that's the only way there is. And so we repeat the way. How many of you at some point in your lives have said, oh my God, I'm doing exactly what my mom or what my dad was doing? And I hate myself for it more. I said I wasn't going to do it. So the stigma about parenting, the way we approach families with the support that it is very tough work what they're doing. That we really understand where they are instead of coming across, and I don't think that we come across voluntarily as saying, I have the good parenting way, you don't. I think we try very much to avoid that, but that part is a very, very important one. Sending people to parenting classes, it's incredibly good way of telling me you don't really know anything about kids. Start by knowing that you don't do this and you don't do that. It's really, really getting kids to base one. How many of you have learned a second language as adults? Okay. When you learn a second language as an adult, part of what happens is you're placed in a situation of a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old. You're talking in sentence, in words and syllables. You can't communicate. You don't know what to do, which is perfectly acceptable when you're a child, but not when you've learned to speak again. If you go to a parenting class and you're put in a situation where you're being told that a child needs to be wrapped up this way instead of the other way, or not shaken instead of that, you're put again in a situation of a person that really doesn't know the basic. And it's tough. It's really, really tough. It's not done properly. What we can help families do, the way we can help them is, the first one is finding out what are the obstacles. What I was talking about when we were talking about why don't women leave? Okay? Go from the assumption that no human being likes to be beaten or threatened or have control over them. There is nothing as they are in this because they like it. Okay? If they are in this, it's because they can't leave for many other factors. And so help remove those obstacles to change. Really figure out what the obstacles are and help remove that. Encourage to weigh the consequences of their actions. When we talk with people telling them, do this and do that, we're not valuing what their current actions are. If we tell them, if you do this, this is the consequence. If you do this, this is the consequence. So if we're working with a parent on spanking, okay, this parent spanks the child, not abuse, spanking. We can get into a discussion of whether spanking once in a while is abuse, but that's a different story. I don't want to get there now. And so if we tell the parent, stop spanking, you cannot do that. That's bad for the child. Versus, what happens when you spank a child? And what happens if you don't spank a child? You're validating that there are some results that they get when they spank. It may not be the appropriate one because, the next day the child is doing exactly the same thing. But you are validating some of what they do and saying what are the consequences. When you work with an alcoholic and just tell them what happens when you drink, they themselves hopefully come to the point where they themselves want to change the consequence of what they're doing. So weigh that and have them learn more options. Okay, if you're not going to spank your child, what can you do instead when your child is repeatedly doing things that you don't like? When your child is throwing a temper tantrum in the grocery store? Or fighting with their brothers and sisters. What are other things that you can do? Have them have more options. Help them mobilize immovable objects. All of us have some things. I cannot do this. I cannot go to a gym because I don't have the time. I would love to go. I need to go. It's healthy to do. But you know what? I don't have the time. There's not one near my house. That's an unmovable object. Or I don't have money to pay for the gym. Okay? So if you really want to do it, what are other ways that you can do it? Can you do it at home? Can you walk around the block? What are some other options that you may have if you really want that? When you open options for people, you are helping them figure out that maybe what happens is that they really are not into it. In order to do something and to change something that you do, you need to have the ability first. Second, you need to have the willingness. You need to put your mouth where your actions are. And the third one is you need to be ready to do it. If any of the three are not there, you can't do it. Or you won't do it. You could, but you won't do it. So share your knowledge of community resources. Help them figure out where there are more options. Help them move out things that they may think are immovable. My family will reject me. Well, help them give them words to talk to their family and explain to them what it is. Help them get more option. And what is important here, guys, is one of the things we try to do, we try to take away the pain from people. We don't want this child to suffer. We don't want this woman or this man to suffer, okay? We cannot take the pain away from anybody. We need to allow them to feel their pain because we need to validate that pain. If we're just saying, you know what, don't exaggerate. It's not a big deal. Well, it is a big deal for me. This person, I never trust her, but they always exaggerate. Well, for them, there may not be an exaggeration. It may be truly the way they feel. So allow them to feel the way they are. It's not going to take anything out. What we cannot do, again, is to force them to make the choices that we specifically want. If we open our options, what we're doing is open a plethora of options, and then they need to choose them. Make them happy, I said, prevent them from feeling pain. I want to get to the third one. We can't diffuse their crisis. We can't change their past. What they've lived before, we cannot change. But I want to get to this one because I think this is one that all of us fall into. We cannot tell when people are lying. Okay? There has been so many times that I myself have said, no, in between. She's lying. That's not really the way it is. I cannot guess that. And I'm going to make myself and you miserable if we part from that basis. You know, you have to accept what they're saying, and it may turn out it's not that way, but I will never be able to tell if somebody is lying to me, just from the first base. In order to, 2 minutes. Oh, okay, so I think I'm going to leave it there and just tell you what in your packet you're going to have, because I have at the end of here what are some indications that you need to send people for professional treatment. You are not mental health professionals. That's not your expertise. Neither we want you to be mental health professionals. Those of you that are not, there are some of you that are. And so I have a list there that you can check on when is it really important to send this child or family to treatment. Let me just tell you a couple of things about the resources that you have. There is in the back of these manuals that you got one in English and in Spanish. I know that you don't necessarily work with Spanish, but keep it and maybe offer it to somebody that does speak the language. There is it says Safe Start Center, and there is a web page there that you could go in, and there is a lot of resources that you can access there. These two booklets, it's the same one in English and in Spanish, is really for families, and it really is for families to help them in very plain language, in things they can do at home, in ways to work with their child and understand what their child is going through without making them feel guilty about what's happening. And even if they don't decide and they can't at this particular moment leave the situation, they can use these strategies to really work with the child where the child is. I am going to, if you're interested, guys, this is all entirely up to you. I have a video about children watching, it's called The Children Are Watching. It's a 2020 segment. It's about 18 minutes. I have it. I was going to show it. I won't because of time limitations, but if there is anybody interested in looking at it while you're having lunch, you are welcome. I'll put it here. And I will be staying here for a little while more. If anybody wants to ask questions, I'd be happy to do that. And so I think we're ready for lunch, correct? Thank you.